Make no mistake, there's going to be an important aspect of this. So let's go to CommSec.
In partnership with CommSec.
Now, that 10% tariff on goods exported to America will make a difference, especially in agriculture. And shortly we'll speak with Gary Edwards, the Chief Executive of Cattle Australia. But Dennis Voznesenski, who is agriculture economist with the Commonwealth Bank, joins me now. Dennis, apologies, I always get your name wrong, but I do apologise. Just one issue about this. Can I just start? Agriculture, broadly, is it going to be dramatically affected by Donald Trump's tariffs?
Well, I was looking at this from two particular angles, one on the beef front and one on the canola front. Beef is likely to be the one that's most impacted and most directly impacted by the 10% tariff. Last year, around 29% of all of our beef exports went to the US, but it actually might be at a relatively favourable time. The US is desperately short of beef. They have a cattle herd that's the lowest in multiple decades, and their beef demand is still incredibly strong. So the question is, yes, one, the tariffs are getting put on, but who wears the burden in the end? Because the US importers, do they actually have the ability to negotiate for us to take the burden on? I don't think so. They just don't have enough beef, and they really need it at the moment.
OK, take me through canola, because that's the interesting one to me. We recognise beef as big, but when it comes to canola, which is obviously the stock for margarine in particular, where does Australia and the United States stack up with that?
Well, this is an interesting one, and it's not direct as you would think. So we don't export canola to the US. Instead, the US imports canola oil from Canada. Now, if the US was going to tariff Canadian canola oil, which it didn't because it falls under the USMCA, if it did tariff it, then less Canadian canola oil would flow over the border to America, less would be crushed inside of Canada, and more uncrushed canola would head to our key markets in Europe and in Asia. Luckily, canola oil does fall under the USMCA, so a trade agreement between Canada, Mexico and the US. It's not getting tariffed, and as a result, all that extra canola, it's not going to be competing directly with us in Asia and Europe, at least for now.
So from that point of view, it's not bad. So you've mentioned two key products, agricultural products that could be affected. Is there anything else along the way? Because we know, say for example, GrainCorp is one of the biggest exporters of grain to the world. Does it get caught up in all of this?
Look, the first thing I want to say that for beef, it is a negative. I definitely want to say that it is a negative for beef. But in terms of timing, it definitely could have come at a worse time when that beef demand in the US wasn't as strong. For grain, in theory, it would be a benefit because the more tariffs that the US puts on countries in Asia, the more retaliatory tariffs from places like Korea and Japan there's going to be back on the US and possibly on their grain. And if they're not going to get as much from the US, where are they going to go? They're going to go to countries like Australia. So in theory, that is beneficial. We've already seen China retaliate on US tariffs a couple of weeks ago, where they said they're going to put tariffs on US corn and US wheat and beef actually as well. And if they're not going to get as much from the US, where are they going to get it? They're going to get it from places like Australia. So in theory, so far, from certain angles, we've benefited from the perspective of beef. It's not a positive, but it's come at a time where we're more buffered than usual.
And so what you're basically and broadly saying is that there are going to be mixed messages for Australia. There's going to be some areas where we're going to have more competition, some areas where there's less.
Definitely. So, for example, now that Canada and Mexico have no tariffs on beef, but we do, so that 10%, it means that we are now comparatively less competitive into the US compared to what we were before all this tariff news came about. So if the tariffs were put on Canadian and Mexican beef, we would actually be better off because there's only 10% on us, and in theory there would have been 25% on them. But right now, beef is exempt, canola oil is exempt. So from that angle, we've actually become a little bit less competitive into the US for beef. Unless something changes, and as we know, there's been a lot of changes recently, so Don't rule anything out.
I'll tell you what, Dennis, thank you so much for your time today.